Attention. Full story in the comments. The storm lashed the sky with fury, and the sound of rain on the roof tiles sounded like the world was crying. The windows rattled in the wind, the smell of wet earth invaded the house, and each clap of thunder made my chest tremble. It was in this chaos that the phone rang. I looked at the display. It was Alan's number. My heart sank. He always called me when he was on his way home. I answered with a half smile, trying to drown out the sound of the rain. "Hi, honey. Are you almost here?" On the other end, the silence lasted too long. Then, an unfamiliar voice, firm and measured. "This is the police. You are listed as Alan's emergency contact." My smile faded. "Yes, I am. I'm his partner." "What happened?" The answer came dry, cutting through the air like lightning. "I'm sorry, sir. Your partner was in an accident on the road near Serra Alta. Unfortunately, he didn't make it." The sound of thunder swallowed my scream. The phone slipped from my hand, fell to the floor, and continued to vibrate, as if there was still something to be said. I stood there, staring into nothingness, the sound of the storm, mingling with the terrible certainty that the love of my life would never answer that number again. The storm did not let up that night. It seemed as if the sky had decided to cry with me. I spent hours sitting on the living room floor, staring at the cell phone on the table, his number still glowing on the screen, as if at any moment Alan would actually call, laughing, saying that everything was fine. But the silence was absolute, a silence that weighed heavier than any scream. The next morning, the world seemed different. The sky was still gray, the smell of wet asphalt hung in the air, and I was in the police car, heading toward the hospital in Serra Alta. Every turn in the road was a blow to the chest. When we arrived, the police officer parked the car in silence, turned to me and said, with a look that carried the weight of compassion, "Stay as long as you need, sir." I nodded without being able to respond. The hospital corridors were as cold as the storm outside. I walked among unfamiliar faces to the room where he was. Alan lay under a white sheet, and never had white seemed so cruel. I approached slowly, afraid that touching him would undo what little remained. I ran my hand over his cold face and felt the world break in silence. I thought about everything we hadn't said, the laughter that was yet to come, the plans left half-finished. And it was there, in that moment, that I understood what it means to lose the love of your life. The following days were filled with nothingness. The empty house, his scent on the pillows, the dishes in the sink, the unread messages. Time didn't pass, it just existed, heavy, immobile, as if life had forgotten to go on. Until I found the little key. It was inside the desk drawer, tied with a string and a handwritten label. "Blue Lake Cabin. When you need to breathe." Breathe. That was exactly what I no longer knew how to do. The next morning, I packed a suitcase. I took only the essentials, some clothes, the picture of him smiling in the garden, and the old mug with the anchor design. I closed the door and left the city behind. The road was long and wet, and the sky continued to cry. The windshield wipers fought against the downpour, and each flash of lightning illuminated his face in my memory. When I finally saw the lake, my heart seemed to slow down, not out of relief, but out of exhaustion. The Blue Lake cabin was there, intact and forgotten. The roof covered with moss, the windows fogged up, and the lake reflecting the gray sky. I got out of the car, smelled the wet wood, and felt the cold cutting into my face. I went inside. The floor creaked under my footsteps. I lit the fireplace, sat in front of the fire, and cried. I cried as if crying were the only language I had left. That night I slept on the sofa, hugging his photograph. And for the first time since the accident, the dream visited me. Alan was standing, smiling by the lake, with the sun behind him and the wind moving his hair in the way I loved most. When I reached out my hand, he just smiled and said, in a calm voice, "I'm fine. I'll always be with you." I woke up with wet eyes and a sweet tightness in my chest. The silence in the cabin seemed less heavy, as if something inside me had quieted down. The next morning, I decided to go down to the village. The still damp dirt road wound through the pine trees, and the smell of burning wood accompanied me to the first houses. I looked for a carpenter. The cabin roof needed repairs, but no one could help me that day. I left my contact information at a small grocery store. The owner, a man with a hoarse voice and a kind gaze, promised to pass my number on to a carpenter he knew who lived nearby. I bought a few things that were missing in the cabin: fresh bread, coffee, candles, and a bottle of cheap wine. Then I returned to the lake. The way back was covered with damp leaves and silence. When I arrived, dusk was falling over the water, and for a moment, I felt that this place was slowly beginning to welcome me. That night, the wind blew strongly again, but inside the cabin, there was only the sound of the crackling fire and the light weight of loneliness turning into peace. And it was the next morning, as I lit the wood stove, that I heard the sound of a car stopping outside. Footsteps on the mud, 3 firm knocks on the door. I opened it. Before me stood a tall man with a short beard and a calm gaze, about 41 years old. He took off his hat and said, "Good morning. I'm Marcos, the carpenter. The grocery store owner gave me your number." I just nodded, trying to hide the trembling in my hands. I didn't know it yet, but that man with the smell of rain and the serenity of those who know pain was about to rebuild much more than the roof of the cabin. He came in, took off his hat, and lightly tapped his shoes on the threshold so as not to dirty the wooden floor. The smell of rain and wet wood mingled with the aroma of the coffee I had just brewed. We talked for a few minutes about the roof repairs, the old boards, the damp plaster, the need to replace some beams. He listened quietly, attentively, as if weighing each word. After looking around, he nodded and said in a deep, calm voice, "All right, Mr. Otavio, I'll start the repairs tomorrow. But I warn you, this renovation will take a while. If you want to go back to the big city, I'll call you when I'm done." I looked at him and replied firmly, even though my voice was breaking, "No, I'm not going back. I came here to stay for a while." He stared at me for a moment, as if he understood more than the words said, and simply replied, "All right, Mr. Otavio." He held out his hand, a calloused, warm hand that smelled of wood and honesty, and added with a slight smile, "See you tomorrow." I nodded. He put his hat back on, left, and the sound of the engine faded away among the trees. I stood at the door for a few seconds, watching the light rain fall on the lake, and felt something strange inside me, a slight, almost imperceptible movement, as if a crack of light were beginning to open up in the darkness. I woke up before sunrise. The lake still slept under a fine mist, and the silence was so pure that I could hear the crackling of the embers that remained in the fireplace. I made coffee and sat at the table, looking out the window at the reflection of the gray morning. A short time later, I heard the sound of an engine coming up the trail. A pickup truck slowly appeared between the pine trees and stopped in front of the cabin. Marcos calmly got out, adjusted his hat, and waved his hand. "Good morning, Mr. Otavio. I told you I'd come early." I smiled slightly. There was something in the way he spoke, a steady serenity, like someone who had learned to live one day at a time. He opened the back of the pickup truck, took out some boards, tools, and an old radio which he placed on a log. Soon, the soft sound of old music filled the air. It sounded like something my parents used to listen to when I was a boy. While he worked, I stood on the porch watching. His arm muscles moved under his simple shirt, the hammer striking rhythmically, the smell of cut wood mingling with the aroma of the coffee I had left cooling on the table. It was strange how, for the first time in months, that sound, the sound of someone building something, brought me a sense of peace. When he stopped to drink some water, I approached him. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked. He looked at me and smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't rush, but is full of kindness. "Yes, I would. And please call me Marcos. Sir is for those who have given up on life." I chuckled softly, shaking my head. "All right, Marcos. But then you don't have to call me sir either, okay?" He raised his eyebrows, still smiling. "Deal." We sat on the porch. The sound of the wind in the background mingled with the birdsong, and the aroma of fresh coffee filled the air. For a moment, I forgot the weight of time. We talked about simple things, the weather, the lake, the village, the autumn rains. The days went by. Every morning, the sound of hammers mingled with the birdsong, and the cabin began to change its appearance. The cracks disappeared, the roof gained strength, and the smell of new wood spread through the air, bringing a feeling of rebirth. Marcos worked silently, focused, and I watched him through the window, his body steady, his movements confident, the patience of someone who understands the timing of things. There was something beautiful about seeing him transform abandonment into shelter. When the sun set and the lake began to reflect shades of copper, I would go out onto the porch and look around. The walls no longer creaked, the fireplace lit easily, and the floor shone with fresh varnish. Everything was breathing again. I ran my hand over the smooth wood, smelled the resin, and thought quietly, Alan would love this. For a moment, it seemed as if he were there, smiling in some corner, proud to see what love and the silent presence of a stranger were rebuilding. One afternoon, as we rested on the porch after work, he told me about his past. He spoke slowly, looking at the lake, his voice hoarse and low, as if afraid of awakening memories. I lost my wife a few years ago, he said. Since that day, I've never felt complete, and to be honest, I've never been able to truly give myself to anyone else. For a moment, silence took over. The wind blew gently, and the reflection of the sun on the water flickered as if the lake was listening too. Then I saw a tear slowly roll down his cheek. Without thinking, I just followed my instinct. I approached Marcos, pulled him to my chest, and hugged him. I felt his body, firm and trembling at the same time, the warmth of his skin mixed with the smell of wood and rain. He hesitated for a second, but soon returned my hug, resting his face on my chest. I ran my hand through his hair, then gently caressed his face and whispered, "It's okay." We stayed like that for a few minutes, without saying anything. Just two men, tired of losing, finding shelter in each other. And in that silence, I felt something different being born. It wasn't desire yet. It was peace. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. After that hug, time seemed to stand still. The afternoon slowly faded away, and the sound of the wind among the pine trees mingled with the steady beating of his heart against my chest. When we finally let go, Marcos took a deep breath, ran his hand over his face, and tried to hide what he was feeling with a brief smile. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I don't usually open up like this." "No need to apologize," I replied. "Sometimes we just need to be heard." He nodded, looked at the sky that was beginning to turn violet, and said he was going to finish putting away the tools. When he turned to leave, I called him back. "Marcos, would you like to have dinner with me?" He looked surprised, was silent for a moment, and replied with an uncertain half-smile. "Oh, I don't want to bother you, Mr. Ottavio. You must want to rest." I nodded, with a slight smile. "It wouldn't be any trouble. The truth is, I don't want to have dinner alone." There was a moment of silence between us, the wind blowing through the trees, and then he said in a low, simple tone, "Okay, I accept." I nodded, and while he put away the last of his tools, I went into the cabin and lit the fireplace. I took what I had, a little rice, onions, 2 pieces of meat I had bought in the village, and the cheap wine that sat on the cupboard. The smell began to fill the room, and the fire cast warm shadows on the new walls. When he returned, he stopped at the door and took a deep breath. "That smells good," he said in that soft tone. "Can I help with anything?" "Yes," I replied with a smile. "Stay." He chuckled softly and pulled up a chair, taking off his hat. The scene seemed simple, but there was something beautiful, almost sacred, about 2 men sharing the same space after so much time alone. We talked little during dinner. We talked about the lake, the weather, the smell of wet wood. Sometimes he smiled, and that smile lit up the cabin more than the fireplace itself. When we finished, he stood there for a moment, somewhat awkwardly, looking at the door. "I think I'll be going now, Ottavio. I'll continue the work early tomorrow morning." I accompanied him to the porch. The wind was cold, and the moon reflected on the lake with a soft glow. He turned to say goodbye. "Thanks for dinner. It was nice being here." For a moment, we stood there, face to face. The silence seemed to push us toward each other, and without knowing who took the first step, our lips met. It was a brief, shy, almost confused kiss, but it was real. Soon after, we pulled away, a little embarrassed. He lowered his gaze, adjusted his hat, and smiled slightly. "Good night, Ottavio." "Good night, Marcos." I watched the truck drive away among the trees, its lights gradually fading around the bend in the road. I stood on the porch, feeling my heart beat in a way it hadn't in a long time. Something inside me had changed. For the first time since Alan left, I felt like living again, like being happy. The day dawned quietly, with the lake covered in a soft mist. The air carried the scent of damp earth and the distant sound of birds that seemed to be slowly waking up. I made coffee early, but I confess I could hardly taste it. I could still feel the brief touch of the previous night's kiss on my lips. When Marcos arrived, he greeted me differently restrained, overly careful. He worked all day without talking much, without humming as he used to. I noticed that he avoided looking me in the eye, and that there was a new weight in his gestures, an almost forced caution. In the afternoon, as he hammered the last boards of the roof, the wind brought the smell of rain. I watched from the balcony, feeling a knot in my chest, a mixture of doubt and a desire to understand what was going on inside him. When the sun began to set behind the mountains, I called him. "Marcos, can we talk for a minute?" He slowly put down his tools, wiped his hands on a cloth, and approached me. His face was serious, his gaze downcast. "Sure, Otavio. Is everything okay?" I asked. "You've been different since early this morning." He took a deep breath, scratched the back of his neck, and answered honestly, unable to look me in the eye. "I'm just a little embarrassed, to be honest." "Embarrassed?" "Yeah, because of what happened yesterday. I've never," he paused, "never done that with another man." We stood in silence. The sound of leaves rustling seemed to fill the space between us. I took a step forward and spoke calmly, without rushing, looking him straight in the eye. "It's okay, Marcos. We didn't do anything wrong." He looked up, and in that instant, I saw a mixture of fear and relief in his eyes. He approached slowly. I didn't need to say anything else. When he was close enough, the wind brought the smell of wood and sweat his scent. I reached out, touched his face, and he closed his eyes. We embraced. It was a firm, sincere embrace that spoke more than any words could say. And then we kissed again, this time, without guilt, without haste, without hiding what lay between the lines of all our silences. It was a calm kiss, full of tenderness and discovery. When we pulled apart, he kept his forehead pressed against mine and whispered, "I don't know what's happening to me." I smiled slightly. "Neither do I, Marcos. But I don't think you need to understand right now. Just feel." The sun had already disappeared behind the mountains. The lake below reflected the last glimmer of the afternoon, and, for the first time in a long time, I felt that the future could, indeed, be beautiful again. Night fell slowly, covered by a clear sky full of stars. The wind blew cold from the lake, and the cabin seemed more alive than ever, warmed by the fire in the fireplace and by what had happened between us. After that second kiss, we just sat there for a while, side by side without speaking. The silence was no longer heavy, it was a good silence, the kind that exists between people who understand each other without needing words. Marcos stared at the flames, and I stared at him. From time to time our eyes met, and something new was born there. Affection, tenderness, perhaps even a beautiful fear of letting go. He smiled shyly and said, almost in a whisper, "It's been a long time since I've felt this peaceful." He moved a little closer, and I touched his hand. We stayed like that for long minutes, our fingers intertwined, until the tiredness of the night enveloped us. Without thinking too much, we just followed the natural flow of things. We lay side by side, embracing, feeling each other's warmth and the soft sound of the wind in the windows. His heart was beating fast, and so was mine, not out of fear, but out of life. There, between the fire and the darkness, we took another step in this new discovery of Marcos, a step made of affection, surrender, and trust. There was no rush, no guilt, no big words. Just two men, rediscovering, in each other, the right to feel alive again. We fell asleep like that, our bodies tired and our souls light, like those who finally find shelter after a long storm. Time passed, and with it, the weight of grief became lighter. The cabin is now perfect, every board firm, every window tightly fitted, every detail crafted with care by Marcos's hands. When the wind blows, the sound of the wood seems to breathe, as if the house has finally found peace. But the truth is that peace has also found a home within me. Marcos continues to come here often. In fact, he comes all the time. But now, it's no longer because of the renovation, it's because of us. For those moments when we are together, laughing for no reason, sharing breakfast on the porch, or just lying down listening to the lake breathe at sunset. No rush, no plans, no promises, just living. You may wonder if I have forgotten Alan. The answer is no. I never forgot him. But I learned that remembering is not the same as holding on. Over time, I realized that love does not die with absence, it changes form. It ceases to be pain and turns into gratitude. I understood that life doesn't ask us to replace those we love. It just invites us to continue loving, in another way, in another time, with another face. Love is not a wound that needs to heal. It is a long road, where every step, even the ones that hurt, lead us to a place of light. Today, when I look at the lake, I no longer see the reflection of loneliness. I see the reflection of continuity. Alan taught me to love. Marcos taught me to start over. And between the two, I learned that living is accepting that nothing is eternal, but that everything can be beautiful while it lasts. Love, after all, is not the opposite of loss. Love is what remains despite it. Life is made up of new beginnings, and sometimes love appears when we no longer believe in it. If this story touched something inside you, if it reminded you of someone, or simply made you breathe deeper for a moment, sign up. Here, every story is a piece of the soul. Every word is a shelter, and all love, even if it comes late, is still worth living. My name is Otavio. I'm 43 years old, and this was my story. Kisses and see you soon. Don't forget, the uncut version is in the comments.